It seems to be really inspiring a lot of global warming preachers, particularly when they look at that wonderful government overreaction, they're reaching the hand into our very lives, Here's the UN Secretary General, for instance.
The COVID-19 pandemic has exposed the fragility of all societies and economies to global shocks, such as disease or climate disruption. As we recover, we must build back better for people and the planet, invest in green jobs, do not bail out polluting industries, end fossil fuel subsidies, take climate risks into account in all financial and policy decisions.
Meanwhile, we've got global warming priestess Greta Thunberg saying this crisis shows we must put our differences aside, cooperate and listen to the science and the experts, which is the mantra with global warming. And those experts in this case include Brett Sutton, the Chief Health Officer of Victoria, the state that's most hardcore with these bans. And Sutton, Rowan, is also a global warming extremist. He last month wrote that climate change represents an existential threat to human health. The growing threats, he said, to health from our changing climate, therefore needs to be central to our thinking and our actions, because in a scenario of 4 degrees warming by 2100, we'd get floods, coastal inundation, bushfires, extreme winds, soil movement and extreme heat. Rowan, it sounds like we're in for a rerun of this coronavirus reaction, alarmist claims and strong-arm policies on global warming.
And this is disgraceful, Andrew, because if any single event can be looked at or political kind of movement that can be looked at apart from the Chinese government, the communist government itself. But why was the West, why was the world, the entire world more importantly, so unprepared for this pandemic when we had one a decade ago and we've had plenty in history? And the reason is, for the very simple reason that the United Nations, including that character GUTERRES, who seriously should be hauled up in front of a tribunal for neglect, the World Health Organization, ditto, they ignored the pandemic of a decade ago and focused all the world's attention for the last decade on the myth of climate change, or what they perceived to be an existential threat to the world. Why didn't we have a young girl standing up every year at conferences talking about the coming pandemic and how we should all be prepared for it and how we should have more beds ready and more ventilators ready? Why didn't we have world leaders flying in and out of meetings in Brazil and Rio and elsewhere, maybe even Wuhan, to say we've got to be ready for the next pandemic, because if we all pull together and focus on this, we will be able to prevent it? No, instead, the United Nations, paid a fortune by this country and all other countries, the World Health Organization, we give hundreds of millions to, they ignored it and they focused on climate change instead of a genuine health threat. And I have to say, those doctors, those medics, those experts are just as culpable. And I would say in Australia, we've done the same thing. Only the few governments in the world, Taiwan, Singapore and others, were prepared for this because they took notice of the sign.
You're spot on. Taiwan and Hong Kong in particular learned from that SARS epidemic, and they prepared, and they've had magnificent success while keeping their economies open. Taiwan, just 6 deaths, although it's the size population-wise of Australia. 6 deaths, and the economy is open. People are not forced to stay at home because they learned from the SARS epidemic. They prepared.